Unless you've had your eyes and ears welded shut for the past 2 years, you'll be well aware of Ducati's Scrambler. It's a mix of rugged 60s dirt bike style and authentically traditional air-cooled engine, wrapped up in a pleasant, easy to ride, easygoing, fun, stylish, trendy street bike. And if that sounds appealing, well, you're not alone. This is Ducati's biggest selling bike by a country mile. In the 2 years it's been around, they've sold more than 30,000 of the things, and that works out to something like one every half an hour. Imagine selling a bike every 30 minutes, non-stop, night and day, around the world somewhere for 2 straight years. Now Ducati are building on that popularity with the latest model in the family, the Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. Now we'll come back to exactly what a desert sled is a bit later on, but the most important thing to understand is that this isn't just another variant of the existing bike dressed up with some fancy bits out of the bulging accessories catalogue. This is a completely re-engineered Scrambler. It stands aside from the rest of the range. The only things it seems to have in common with the basic model is the engine, even though even that's been modified slightly, and the fuel tank. Everything else you see here pretty much is new. Ducati have made it tougher, they've made it taller, and they say this now gives it the ability to head off into the wilderness and live up to its desert sled name. So what exactly is a desert sled? Well, it comes from California in the 1960s and 70s, made by taking a regular road bike with a large capacity engine and modifying it just enough to head off into the desert. To prove just how good this is in a desert, Ducati have decided to launch it in one. We're in the southeast corner of Spain near Almeria, and this is apparently the driest, warmest spot in Europe, although you could fool me today. We're just about to head into the technical presentation to find out exactly what Ducati have done to this bike. But in typical quirky Scrambler fashion, this isn't going to be done in a boring conference room. Ducati are going to give us the information in the local saloon. So the biggest change to the Desert Sled over the regular Scrambler is its height. Ducati have jacked the whole bike up front and rear with bigger, thicker, longer 46mm fully adjustable Carber forks and an even longer shock, which is around this side. Seat height has gone from a nice low manageable 790mm on the regular Scrambler up to a massive 860mm. That's about 34 inches. So it is worth bearing that in mind if you're not exactly gifted in the leg department. There's an extra 50mm or 2 inches of suspension travel at both ends, which is essential for absorbing all those lumps and bumps and battering over rocks in the desert. And as well as that, the frame has been reinforced. On the regular Scrambler, the frame sort of stops around here at the rear engine mount. But on this one, they've added some forged steel sections to continue the frame on through the swing arm pivot and round to the bottom of the engine. And that helps spread the load throughout the bike. In addition, the swing arm is stiffer and longer, and that not only increases the wheelbase for better stability, but it also gives the rear wheel a bit more room to move up and down and not clash into the number plate. Wheels and tyres are new too. As you can see, they're spoked, not cast. The front is now larger at 19 inches and the rear tyre is slightly slimmer at a 170 section, not 180. And that helps cut through the dirt and sand. Tyres are Pirelli's Scorpion Rally STR. If you haven't heard of it before, that's because it's a brand new tyre, especially for this bike. It's a semi-knobbly design, so it's a good mix of both on-road and off-road performance. And there are loads of other detail changes too. The mud guards are new, front and back. The handlebars are new. The foot pegs are new. The exhaust end cam, the silencer is new. Basically, it is a brand new bike. Well, other than the engine. This is the same 803cc 2-valve air-cooled V-twin that's in the existing Scrambler. The only changes that Ducati have made are a couple of little tweaks to get it through the latest emissions standard. One of them, in fact, is up here at the throttle. The shape of the tube has been changed to give it a slightly slower action in the first few degrees of travel. And that will hopefully also cure the slightly snatchy throttle that the standard bike has. Now, despite those changes, Ducati say that the engine's performance hasn't changed at all. It still makes 74 horsepower with 50 foot-pounds of torque. There's still no ride-by-wire, no traction control, no cruise control. The only rider aid this bike has is ABS, which you now have to have legally, but even that can be disabled. It seems like the only thing left to do is to get out of Dodge and go and see how this bike handles the Wild West, or East. Ducati said they were serious about giving the Desert Sled some real off-road ability, and today's test route certainly backs that up. I think we've ridden more miles off the road than on it today, on a right old mix from tight, tricky, sandy trails through to wider, faster, rockier routes. Let's start with on the road, as that's where most people will spend most of the time with one of these bikes. First change you notice as soon as you set off is the Desert Sled's new riding position. Because you're sat so much higher up, because the bars are set a bit further forward so it's more of a reach over the bike, the whole thing feels a lot more substantial. The standard Scrambler can feel a little bit toy-like at times, but on this you feel a lot more dominant. The bike feels a lot more solid. And despite the bike's extra length and an extra 21 kilos in weight, you don't actually notice any of that when you're riding. It just steers really intuitively, really sweetly into the corners. Another huge improvement is the suspension. It might be fully adjustable front and rear now, but that isn't what really makes a difference. It's the internals and the quality of the damping. Again, on the standard Scrambler, it can be a little bit patchy at times, especially over some of the harsher lumps and bumps you come across. But the Desert Sled absorbs them really well. It's quite a soft setup, and that does mean that when you're changing direction really aggressively from side to side, it can be a little bit vague at times. The front brake itself is the same Brembo 4-piston caliper as on the regular Scrambler, and just as there's a good amount of power, but not an excessively strong bite. It's actually quite a gentle setup when you squeeze the lever, and that's definitely a good thing when it comes to the off-road side of the riding. The other thing that's worth mentioning is the improved throttle response. Now, normally when manufacturers say that they've made some engine changes to get it through a tougher emission standard, you worry that the throttle's going to be made snatchier, but in this instance it's far smoother than the existing or outgoing Euro 3 Scrambler. The engine isn't super powerful, but it does have a lovely low down punch. It's really at its best from sort of 4,000 to about 7,000 revs, and it's not really worth taking beyond that. Best to keep it in the mid-range. The engine's polite, predictable punch is well suited to when you're riding off-road too. It's never going to get carried away with itself, but it is responsive enough to give you an extra burst of power when you need it, to help you drive up a little climb or just help you get out of a bit of trouble. The riding position is really nicely balanced when you stood up too, and that's a trick that not a lot of adventure bikes actually get right. When you stand up straight, the handlebars are exactly where you expect to find them. The brake and clutch lever are so light you only need 1 or 2 fingers to operate them, and even the foot pegs feel like they're in exactly the right position. However, the one fly in the ointment when you're standing up is the rear shock's top mounting bolt. It actually digs into your left calf as you're riding along. It starts off as slightly irritating, but by the end of a full day's riding, it's really, really annoying. Today's terrain was fairly easygoing. It was a good match for both the bike's ability and my own, but if you're a veteran off-roader used to light, nimble motocross bikes and far more challenging terrain, you're going to struggle. That was interesting. Get a bit giddy and just decided to take the Desert Sled down a little dried up riverbed I found. Got myself into a bit of a pickle really. Bike handled it alright, but it does remind you that it is first and foremost a road bike with some light off-roading, not necessarily serious off-roading. It's still very good, but it is 207 kilos fully fueled, and that puts it sort of on a par with some adventure bikes. So it's no little motocrosser just yet. Dynamically, it's a far better bike than the standard Scrambler, and now that it's not afraid to get its tyres dirty, it has an extra authenticity and credibility that I think is slightly lacking from the original. The Desert Sled costs £9,532 on the road for the red version, with an extra £100 premium on this white model. For me, this is the Scrambler Ducati should have built from the start. It has all the charm and character of the standard Scrambler, but it now has a newfound sense of purpose. And of course, because it is a Scrambler, there's still an enormous mountain of accessories you can choose from, including exhausts and indicators and engine guards and t-shirts and cuddly bears, anything else you can think of. Well, after a great day in the desert enjoying the new Desert Sled, it's time to put this steed back in its stable and head off to the saloon.